All right, real quick, I just wanted to say that that really, like, literally, my little flower hat, whatever it is, but the Atlantic and Pacific is a perfect example of ley lines. Now, you would say, why is that? Well, there's a reason why those two waters, because really it's the salt mixture that is in one area, and then the salt mixture in another ocean are different, so they don't mix. What does this mean? That certain energies don't mix, and they meet up in specific places, and they are cut off in specific places, i.e. it feels different and in one place than it does in another. It has to do with the amount of people that are there, the belief system that is there, and the energy that is there makes that combination happen. When that combination is there, it creates a barrier, and those barriers are not a coincidence. They're actually certain energetic lines that are across the entire earth. I.e., another example could be why, there's different types of ley lines. There's different energies going different places. But I'll give you another example of everyone coming up with a certain idea at a different level of latitude. Another level of latitude. And all the points across there, that line of latitude has they think a certain way, so much so that they actually design and invent certain things. These things actually rotate around the earth, these informations. It's because of that. And there's a lot of other factors. I can't pretend to know everything, but these are the things that I'm familiar with that are in line with each other. They fit together.
Remember a couple of basic things from physics. You might argue that a denser liquid should finally end up lower and less dense higher. If that were true, the border between the two oceans would look not like a vertical line but as a horizontal one, and the difference between their salinity would become less obvious the closer they got to each other. So why doesn't it happen here? Well, first, the difference in density of water of the two oceans is not that great for one of them to get down and the other to rise up. And yet it's enough to not let them mix. Still, another reason is inertia. One of the inertia of water is water. What could interfere with its mixing? The thing is that water can be different too. The Atlantic and Pacific Oceans have different density and chemical makeup. Bodies of water with different ley lines. A curious, rather quaint subculture found deep within old-school archaeologist fields. Like that of the crop circle, they are looked upon with an air of cynicism. The ley line is another intriguing theory that once one begins to dig into, finds the work of passionate, revered, and highly capable individuals who pursued the subject with hunger. One begins to see a rather compelling and convincing side to the field of study, which the deeper one digs into, the more convinced one can become. The Earth Mysteries movement. Much of modern culture is aware of the rebellious nature during the 60s. People rebelled in many ways, and the music became legendary. However, what many people may not be aware of is that there is also a rebellion within academic archaeology. John Mitchell was one particular individual who played a major role in promoting a belief in ley lines. His respected status risked, as we have discussed many times, for if one even in the most established of positions can find their career disintegrate around them simply for not supporting currently funded paradigm. Yet regardless, John helped to professionalize the discipline. His acceptance, but more importantly, his valiant public exposure of his opinion, made the subject a movement, no longer a cynical pseudo-vocation. The transcendence of theory to reality for ley lines meant that it was no longer an amateur-dominated field of research. As one would imagine, the so-called ley lines, upon exploration, began to suggest that not only were they indeed real, but an ancient, advanced, lost, or possibly hidden civilization not only built along them, but that evidence began to mount that, by doing so, energy fields not yet fully understood in the modern world were somehow being harvested or utilized by these ancient structures. Inevitably, this deepening of controversial conclusions made by many capable archaeologists, they inevitably began to be battled against by mainstream institutions. It was in the latter decade that advocates of energy fields and their significance within an extremely ancient culture, who somehow knew of these complex grid systems, was ultimately the rub, as with the pyramids. It is the advanced nature of ancient ruins, later realized, which sentences said site to dismissal, conspiracy, and ignorance by funded institutions. Thus, anyone who had researched and subsequently become convinced of ley lines began to be labeled as members of the counterculture, where, in the words of the archaeologist Matthew Johnson, quote, "they were attributed with sacred significance or mystical power." Ruggles noted, "In this period, ley lines came to be conceived as lines of power, the paths of some form of spiritual force or energy, accessible to our ancient ancestors, but now lost to narrow-minded 20th century scientific thought." End quote.